Hello, I am Carl from Denmark, and this is episode number 5 of my series of the early Beatles. I am so glad that I decided not to talk more about Pete Best's drumming and how good or bad it is, because as I said in the previous episode, it's really not something I like to talk about. So I will talk about something else because I think there is other things to say. There is this thing about group dynamics, when people are together and how are they connecting with each other and all that sort of stuff. And during the years, there have been contradiction, contra- contradicting stories. Uh, the other Beatles say that he was a bit of a loner and didn't really was in on it. And Pete say, well, he was, and he tells a lot of stories about, well, then this happened and then that happened, and I was there and I took part of it, and so and so. So who's telling the truth and who is lying? Well, maybe it's not a question about that at all. Let me show you a little picture here. Well, I think that is fantastic, that little drawing, because you can say they are both right, and in a way they are both wrong. Or, no, they are not wrong, but they are right in a way that doesn't make the other part wrong. And can such a thing be when we are talking about group dynamics and how people connect with each other? Yes, it can. And I had actually experienced that myself. There was a time during my childhood when I was changing school, and in my new class, there were mostly girls. We were only 5 boys. There were four, and along came I as number 5. And that little group of boys were running around together all the time, and I just couldn't do that. Not all the time. It was not that I didn't like them. It was not that I didn't thought it was funny games we played, or anything. It was just sometimes I had to go a little away. So I think about a week or two or something, I was a part of that very tight group, and well, then there was a day that I really don't remember what has happened, but there was something, and it was not at school. It was something with my parents or whatever, something in my after school time. So there was a bit of things going round in my head, and so I was running a bit for myself and thinking. And some of the girls came up to me and said, "Well, are they keeping you out?" And I was, "What? No, not at all. Uh, I, I just needed a little time for myself." And I was also a bit what and a bit oh no, am I acting strange now? And I it really hadn't entered my mind that someone could think that it could seem strange or something, that I just needed a little time for myself and couldn't run around in that uh, little bubble unit, what you call it, all the time. And I really didn't saw it as drifting away from the other boys. And well, that was actually was sort of happened, but a little later on. But even later on, if anyone had asked me, aren't you running a lot around for yourself, and why aren't you playing with the other boys and such things? I really didn't saw it like that, and I would have said, well, I just talked to that other boy a minute ago, and I'm not some sort of strange loner or anything. I just told a joke up in class, and everybody was laughing. What what do you mean? Uh, so I really didn't saw it that way, but I know other people did, and I could tell a lot about things where I was a part of what was going on and was talking with the other boys and playing with the other boys and all that thing. But I had this thing about once in a while I needed just a little space, a little running around with myself, and people actually began to think that I was some kind of strange kid running around there with his thoughts and uh, not being in the crowd, and I didn't saw it like that. And I said in a previous episode that I think it's wrong to paint that picture of Pete as a, but I think he was a bit shy, uh, and maybe not the one that talked the most. And uh, there is this interview with Mo. Uh, I talked about that video with that guy that had this analyze of the Pete Best version of Love Me Do. He also used a clip from that, and he said, "Well, who of the other Beatles would bring a parent?" And that's right. Uh, well, Paul and John lost their mothers in an early age, but it is known that Paul was quite close to his father, but you couldn't imagine a TV interview with Paul McCartney sitting there holding hands with his father. Uh, so yeah, that's right. But have what I had kind of thought about that interview is that it is Mo that doing most of the talking, and Pete doesn't say very much. But even in other interviews without Mo, and it's just Pete, and of course he's talking to the journalist, and he's answering the questions. But he seems a little bit shy, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a crime being a bit shy, and that doesn't make you some sort of asshole or something. And as I have stated previous, most people who have actually met him say that he's a nice guy. But there were so many things uh, about the Beatles that was so much about uh, throwing out quick one-liners. I mean, all those interviews when and they are kind of making fun of the press, uh, and all those brilliant one-liners, uh, and you couldn't really imagine Pete doing that. And imagine some of those interviews and Paul, John, and George with all their brilliant one-liners, and Pete just standing there. And that famous one Ringo made when they were asked if they were just Elvis copies, and he said, "No, that's not true." Well, you could really not imagine Pete doing that. So yes, I guess he is a little bit shy, and I said nothing wrong with that, but it sticks out when there are three guys that go so fast with words, and he may not always knows what to say. Uh, he's just this nice, a bit quiet, but easygoing fellow, and so it's not like he is. Uh, it's just maybe a not that style as John, Paul, and George. I should stick to my time schedule. I can't let this video run for much longer. So just a little ending thing here. There has been this quite silly story about the reason for the second of Pete Best was that he had natural curls, so he couldn't comb his hair down forward like the others did. So that should be the reason. Of course, that's a silly explanation, but on a metaphorical level, I think there's something to it. I said on a metaphorical level. So not taking directly, but I have talked about in the previous episodes how he was this rock and roll guy, and maybe not exactly the one they needed for all those things they were about to do. And having the hair back, that was that 50s rock and roll style. And if you had natural curls, that was quite a good thing, because those who hadn't have to use a lot of those greasy stuff to comb their hair back, and and to make it sit like they wanted it to, and all that. With natural curl, it was just there by nature. So uh, uh, so it can be some sort of symbolic that he was that rock and roll guy, and about this thing, uh, just as I told about here with that story about me changing school. And I mean, at first I was not sticking out. I was just a new boy, but that was okay. They were friendly, and they were interested in getting to know me and all those kinds of things, and we had a good time. But then a few things happened, and I began to stick a little out, and somebody thought I was a little strange, and that kind of things. And and use and again, on a metaphorical level, it's quite interesting. As long as the Beatles had that greasy rock and roll hairs, Pete's curls were not sticking out. But when they did that thing, oh, suddenly he began to stick out. And again, I'm not saying that that silly hair story should be the explanation, but I say on a metaphorical level, it's I think there's something in it. It's it it got some symbolic value, but for God's sake, do not take it literally.